A Giants podcast for Giants fans
by Giants fans.
It's Shaun Morash.
On the sideline, into the end zone. Touchdown, Giants!
From the offseason to the wins and the losses, it's time to take one Giant step.
Welcome in to One Giant Step. The offseason is here. The offseason is upon us. I'm Shaun Morash. My co-host, producer of this podcast is Bryce Gelman. And we're bumbling and stumbling, which might be apropos for the Giants offseason. So look, here's the deal. I'm going to treat this podcast like it's the first time any of you are listening. It may not be, and I appreciate that. But we might have a new wave of listeners here in the offseason because this truly starts, I think, what needs to be the next page here on 2025 for the New York Giants and what's going to come up in this offseason and season. So you're going to want to follow me on Twitter at Shaun Morash. You're going to want to follow Bryce Gelman at Bryce Gelman, and you're going to want to download and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts available. If you found us on YouTube, that's sweet. That's awesome. We appreciate the video. If you want the audio stuff, so when you're out driving your car, walking your dog, running around, running errands, bam, anywhere podcasts are available, listen, download, subscribe. I say that because it's important. They say in podcasting to, with your listeners, have a strong routine. And I don't disagree, but I truthfully believe in the NFL, you don't want to wait 3 days for news, although we're kind of doing that with this, and you don't want to just stay on a stringent schedule because things ever evolve and things change. So we're going to try our best here to keep it as close as possible to getting some kind of Thursday, Friday, late week episode and some kind of early week episode. But just in case we don't, if you've downloaded and subscribed, bam, you'll get a little alert every time this podcast drops. So Bryce, hello. Let's get the offseason started, pal. How are you, first of all, before we get into all the news and notes?
I'm doing well. Listen, I'm excited to discuss this with you because I've had my thoughts. Obviously, in the past week, we discussed it after the game on Sunday that we thought both of them would come back, and of course, both of them are now back. So let's get into it, Shaun.
All right. So since we last spoke, following the Giants' win over the Eagles, loss to the Eagles, win in terms of getting the third overall pick, we know that Schoen and Brian Daboll are officially back. We speculated such on Sunday night when we taped our last podcast because it felt strongly like it was going in that direction after Glazer reports and Rappaport reports, Schefter reports, and yada, yada, yada. But we woke up Monday morning to a memo. As you've all seen by now, they're back. We've heard John Mara speak more on what he said. They are back. We have heard Brian Daboll and Schoen speak. They didn't give you a whole bunch of news and notes, but they are back. So this was met, obviously, with plenty of criticism because plenty of fans want to just wipe the whole board clean and start over. Of that, look, while I'm in favor of what happened, I've been called an idiot for being in favor of what happened. Look, I'm going to stick to my belief. I don't care, but I don't blame you, and I'm not going to call you an idiot for wanting them gone. But the bottom line is this. As Giants fans, do you want the team to be successful? Do you want the team to win? Then we can't worry about, they should have done it. Now you can only root and hope for the best because we're handcuffed. We don't have any decisions left to make as fans. So they are back together. I think that is a better move, Bryce, as we've already highlighted, than splitting them up.
Yep.
And I do think it was very important that we found out from John Mara, by the way, that when he met with Schoen and Brian Daboll, he did so together as a tandem. It wasn't like, hey, I spoke with Joe and then I spoke with Brian. He met with them together, which to me, if you're going to talk about continuity, if you're going to talk about seeing this thing through, at least do it where you're not breaking up the parts. So, Bryce, I think you're on board with me that all things being equal and considered, this is better than a lot of possible outcomes that involve Schoen staying and a new coach coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I was adamant against that possibility, Shaun. The idea that you bring back the GM, but you fire the coach, when both these guys have been in lockstep on a lot of the things that have happened since they both took over in 2022. We saw it in Hard Knocks. Both these guys have a great rapport, right? I mean, there's a reason why Schoen looked directly to Brian Daboll when he got the job as Giants GM, because they're boys. They're good friends, whatever. They're buddies. They clearly share the same vision when it comes to this team. So listen, I think that this is by far the best possibility among all the different possibilities there were. Splitting them up would have been a disaster. We'd be on here, I think, screaming and hollering. If they were both fired, fine, so be it. But this was the smartest move to make, especially when you consider, Shaun, the available options out there. It's not like the Giants are this they're this like sexy job. Like who the hell wants to work for this team right now?
Bryce, put a pin in that real quick, and I'll just expand upon that. There were reports that, if the Giants were investigating keeping Shane, that they kind of went around what would be interested to them or not, and not a lot of upgrades to Brian Daboll, which, no kidding, what head coach, if given the job, like a big head coach, we're talking about, Vrabel, who feels destined in New England at this time, Brady flirted with Belichick coming out, whatever the case may be, you can't convince me that, look at the long list of guys the Jets are interviewing right now. You're promising me any of those guys are better than Brian Daboll? They're probably not. So, those are the kind of names the Giants are going to interview if they did make this move. So, if you're keeping Shane, keeping Brian Daboll, I think makes a lot of sense. Now, before I get into what John Mara said that I think is important to kind of predict what's going to happen with this Giants offseason, Bryce, I think that, if you're making the case on why Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll should be fired, we know the case. I don't need to lay that out for you. Everybody's pointed to those 2 draft classes, the first 2 that Joe Schoen had, and how far he set back. I am not here to wave pom-poms. I am not here to preach why you're wrong, because you're absolutely right. Those draft classes sucked. I am just here to lay out the glass half full approach to Joe Schoen on maybe some things you've, as listeners or Giants fans, written off. Maybe you don't want to hear, but it is the truth. Okay. And again, it is a rose-colored glasses view, but come on, man, the guy's the GM. So if you want to think that this could work out, you have to put these ideas through your head. Okay. Bryce, you ready for me to lay this out here?
Go ahead.
All right, here we go. At the bye week, Joe Schoen was asked what went wrong with building this team. Okay. And if you don't have the press conference, go back on YouTube, the Joe Schoen bye week press conference. And while he said a lot of things, and a lot of people were looking for a lot of Daniel Jones juice, a lot of people were looking for any regrets on Saquon Barkley, I have gone back and listened to this press conference, and I keep coming back to this. He admitted, I probably approached the first couple off seasons into plugging holes a little too much. Okay. That is an important answer. I can't stress how much that's an important answer, because when you go back and you think about it and put yourself in a position on where you were as a Giants fan when Joe Schoen took the job, Dave Gettleman did leave this team in cap hell. Okay. You see the way Howie Roseman's jumped through gymnastics to figure out the cap. At some point, every team you may think does a great job with the cap. If you backload enough contracts, you'll pay the piper. The Giants and Dave Gettleman made a disaster of the salary cap. Joe Schoen, remember what he did in the offseason? They couldn't afford a single free agent. He went and signed Mark Glowinski to a very low-level deal, and they basically had to figure out through his draft class, which, by the way, everybody goes, well, Daboll and Schoen won with Gettleman's guys. Just remember the 3 biggest defensive plays of the year that got the Giants in the playoffs: the strip on Aaron Rodgers that hurt him in the Packer game, the game-ending play versus the Ravens, and, of course, the touchdown play in Washington. All Kayvon Thibodeau plays. That was when Kayvon was thriving. Yeah. So people forget they didn't just make the playoffs with Daboll's guys. Kayvon was a wrecker in those spots. People forget that, but that happened. Okay. Yeah. Because of that, when he lines up with the 2 first-round picks, did he do a great job? No. I happen to like Kayvon Thibodeau, but he's not Aiden Hutchinson, so I can't fight that. I think he's a keeper. I think he's a guy who's going to get a second deal, but he's not like all-world as a 5th overall pick. Fine, I get that. Evan Neal, absolute disaster. Second-round pick, they maneuvered around for Wan'Dale Robinson. I like Wan'Dale. Didn't love the pick at the time, but I also think with a quarterback that can lead him a little bit and help him out with some yak, I think that's going to be important. I don't think he's played with the right quarterback. And then Josh Azudu, Cordell Flott, Marcus McKeithen. They did end up with Micah McFadden, which has been a good, solid pick as a guy who's, he could play on any team as a late rounder, so that's good. But overall, the draft stunk. But Joe Schoen told you in the press conference he drafted free. They could not afford to plug holes at all in free agency and then go draft best player available. So he went that route, and it is backfired. But he knows it backfired. Bryce, we all know these people, right? When you're around somebody and they have some weird quirks or something, what is a worse person to be around? The person where and they end up leaving the room and you're talking behind the back going, can you believe them, or like that? Or the person that is upfront and acknowledges their idiosyncrasies, right?
Even if they're screwing up left and right, at least they know they're screwing up.
They know they're screwing up left and right, which I think is really, really important. So look, I'm not telling you he shouldn't have screwed up, but I could understand why he made some of the moves. Now, what kills him, I can almost give him a pass for the first draft. That second draft was brutal in hindsight. And I went back and there's a clip circulating online. One of these Giants accounts tweeted out of Brandon Brown talking after the draft and talking about Trey Hawkins specifically and as it appealed to Deonte Banks and talking about the things that Wink Martindale looks for in corners and what these guys could provide. Again, I think the Giants, after winning all those games, Joe Schoen rushed the process a little bit because John Mara was very, very excited that the team had made the playoffs and won a playoff game, and he felt pressure to keep the momentum going. I have been told this from people pretty high up. I have no problem admitting this. I've said so on Twitter. This all tied into the Daniel Jones contract stuff. John Mara was constantly on the phone with Daniel Jones and his people. He wanted to get the deal done. He did not want to do the thing that the Bills did with Tyrod Taylor. He loved Daniel Jones like a member of the Giants family. He wanted it back. So everybody, puts that on Joe Schoen. Joe Schoen, off that year, felt immense pressure from ownership to not be able to freely do what he wanted to do. Joe Schoen wanted to let Daniel Jones test the free agent market and come back to them with the best deal. John Mara did not want to risk that, made all the parties come together.
That changes everything. That changes so many different narratives among Giants fans who were so upset that these guys are coming back because they think they are the main ones responsible for Daniel Jones coming back. But you said this, and I've listened to this, and I hear it, and it makes sense.
I've said this, by the way. I've told you this story a couple times over the last month and a half, but it's prevalent now. Yeah. A lot of this, to me, is one of the big pendulum swings on why you never even heard a whisper about Joe Schoen getting fired. It was all about Brian Daboll because John Mara knows this. And that is why what you saw in Hard Knocks with Saquon felt uncomfortable because Joe Schoen basically had told John Mara, look, I was right about the Daniel Jones thing. It sunk our season. Let me do my job. And that's why John Mara was, adamantly uncomfortable, but he let Joe Schoen do his job last offseason. Okay? So he still screwed up the draft. They drafted in a spot where the trust in Wink Martindale, who was out a year later. That's on Brian Daboll and Wink not figuring it out. You can't invest resources on guys that are specific to Wink Martindale's system that have now set the Giants back. So two colossal failures, but I believe it is all about organizational dysfunction, Bryce. An owner that cares deeply and greatly about the Giants being great again, saw what happened in 2022 and just wanted more of that and kind of forced the issue a little bit for an offseason on Joe Schoen. So he had one offseason with no cap space, and he reached another offseason where he had ownership meddling. I do believe that. And also fallacies on this perfect marriage between Wink and Daboll where you're drafting for guys Wink wants. And then that leaves us in year 3. Wink Martindale is gone. The ashes and the pieces you put together in the first 2 offseasons were there. And to me, this is where I put the glass half full. It is no coincidence that the one offseason where John Mara had to put his hands up and go, okay, Joe, work, is the offseason that we think is the best draft class that they've had. By the way, those guys still got to prove it and take another step in year 2. Yep. It's not like the greatest draft class was done, but a good draft class. It's a free agency where they got John Runyon and Jermaine Illuminor, who we all agree. Man, you know what? When Andrew Thomas was in it, boy, did that O-line look different than it has the last 10 years. I mean, we forget that O-line was functioning for those first 6 weeks of the year before Thomas went down and looked better than it had in years. And he's also come to, Joe Schoen, by the way, look at the market for left tackle and D tackle the way it's exploded, and look at the kind of players Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence are. Retaining your own. He didn't value safety. He didn't value running back as those positions, the positions of value. He came to really good team-friendly deals, in essence, with Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas. Does that mean Joe Schoen's the greatest GM in the world? No. Does that mean Joe Schoen didn't screw up things colossally and has to take ownership? Of course he does. But he knows where he went wrong the first couple of years. He knows why he went wrong. And in an offseason where he was finally allowed to breathe, it was his best offseason in terms of adding players to this field. So, does that mean that he won't whiff immensely this offseason? No. The draft could stink. He could, despite what he says, instead of throwing Hail Marys, go on a little bit of a spending spree, sets the team back, Bryce. But ultimately, if you do want to view things as a positive and understand like what really happened behind the scenes, I've laid out to you what I have been told and, kind of educating my belief on what went on things I've been told. There you go. So that is where we're at.
It was a step in the right direction. I understand the record didn't reflect what had happened in that season, but you can't forget the fact that Andrew Thomas was lost after the Bengals game earlier on in the season. Dexter Lawrence, week 13, week 14, out for the season. They lost a bunch of other guys. At that point, the season's already lost. You need to lose games. I mean, listen, they showed some flashes of this team could actually perform.
They were held back by quarterback early in the year.
And that's the other thing.
The end result is 3 wins, and 3 wins in the NFL is 3 wins, and but they were in a lot. Now, look, they got pushed around by the Eagles at home. That was brutal with Daniel Jones still in the field. Better quarterback play in some of those one-possession games. This is a team that is not as dearth as you think, and that is what a team that we know had bad draft classes for a core. So now, they start stacking some decent draft classes like this one and put a quarterback beyond them. The team can go in the right direction.
And there are people out there probably arguing the Giants could have won more games even with the bad quarterback play. Look at the personnel on defense. Look at the personnel at safety. Look at the personnel at cornerback.
And that is on Joe Schoen, though. That
double-digit games with guys in this. I understand that, but the quarterback play was what clearly hampered this team. Although, if they had a better defense, they would have won one or two or three of those closer games earlier on in the year. Commanders game.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Neighbors dropped the ball. But regardless, you win games, you lose games. If they don't get a block kick versus Seattle, they could lose. Stuff like that evens out. Okay. Again, I am not pounding the drum telling you fans are crazy for wanting Joe Schoen fired, but I think it is important to talk in context about exactly what happened. Now, that being said, Bryce, John Mara met the media, was frisky, was fiery, but also very contradictory. On one hand, he's talking about obviously the number one priority this offseason is for the Giants to identify a quarterback, whether that's through free agency or the draft, that could be the quarterback of their future. On the other hand, he has a very funny answer in hindsight, but it is, whatever happens better happen quick because my patience is wearing thin. Now, I look at those two things, Bryce, and that to me is the biggest Mara contradiction of all of them.
Yep.
If you want to identify the quarterback future, we're all pounding the table, John. We're with you, okay? We want a franchise quarterback in here. It's great if they have what happened with the Commanders and Jaden Daniels. It's great if they happen what happened with the Texans and got C.J. Stroud. But look at the Carolina Panthers or Bryce Young. You feel good about him after year 2. You didn't necessarily feel great about him after year 1. No two rookie quarterbacks are the same at all. So I look at that answer. First of all, I don't like the idea of an owner telling the world what the Giants' number one priority is, even if the world knows. Because if Joe Schoen is looking to make a trade on draft day with a quarterback on his mind, he could be held over a barrel with every single GM and executive group knowing not only do I know you want this move, not only do we know you, Baron, but your owner basically told you had to. Again, minute because it's no secret the Giants are looking for this.
Yeah.
But I never like that. I never like a GM feeling further hamstrung because the world knows what his boss thinks. Okay. With that, Bryce, I think that while it may be obvious, the Giants have nothing but Tommy DeVito left at quarterback. They are going to go both routes. They will draft a quarterback
and they will sign somebody.
Yeah. Where I think the difference is, and I think that this is where I want to tease ahead to next pod next week, is I don't think the free agent will be of the very low end variety. It is not going to be of the Drew Lock, Marcus Mariota kind. Think bigger. Okay. We had a discussion on our Evan and Tiki show about Aaron Rodgers. I'm intrigued by it. Bryce, roll your eyes. I'm not telling you it's going to happen because it takes two to tango. We've talked about maybe Jimmy Garoppolo after that performance with the Rams. Look, but here's the deal. This is where you're at. Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. These are the guys who I think one of those guys will ultimately be a New York Giant next year. And I think that this is where we'll lead. I think the pressure is there because all of those guys give you an opportunity if you're building the roster to win games. And when you feel the time is ready to hand it over to said rookie quarterback, or maybe the rookie quarterback is awesome in August and you go, you know what, the hell with it. Look at Cousins and Penix, by the way. The Falcons did it and they were laughed at, but you know what? Maybe that's the right approach here. The Giants did this with Warner and Eli. I think this is not going to be the traditional draft a quarterback. He's handed the keys right away. I think that the pressure is on and they know that if the rookie they feel needs a couple more weeks to develop, they're going to try to stash wins early in the pocket with a veteran.
Yeah, it's more important that they look competent. They don't lose 14 games next year than it is, to have a good young quarterback develop. They want to win games early. They want to not look like this big of a dumpster fire because the pressure mounted quickly, Shaun, this year. And it will get worse and worse and worse next year.
I think that's where they're going to be. So look, we have taped this podcast on a Thursday. We're going to go through wild card weekend here. You might have a Steelers elimination where we could talk about Russell Wilson and Justin Fields a little bit more. Yeah. There's a lot of things that are happening between now and then. Drew Allard, the rookie quarterback or Penn State quarterback, we might know officially his college declaration, yes or no for sure. If they get eliminated by Notre Dame, there's a lot of things in the quarterback world that are going to happen between now and early next week. So I say download, subscribe to One Giant Step. I believe the right approach to starting the offseason right. Let's talk about veteran quarterbacks and where we think the Giants are going to go and who we prefer. And then with that, we're going to kind of map out an entire plan for the offseason. I have some ideas. But nonetheless, you're going to want to stay locked in at Shaun Morash on Twitter, at Bryce Gelman on Twitter. We may even do a full-blown mailbag episode next week on questions. I think could be a good idea. Me and Bryce are just live production meeting this thing up. All right. Thank you to everybody for listening, download, subscribing. Enjoy your wild card weekend. Enjoy your cold weather. And we'll be back at you with a nice quarterback episode next week on One Giant Step.